Imagine this, it's the year 1917. The world is burning in the biggest war it has ever seen. Millions of young men are dying in muddy trenches. In Britain, people are angry, scared, and hungry. And in the middle of all this darkness, the King of England makes one simple decision that changes his family's name forever, from a long German name nobody can pronounce, to just 3 English words, House of Windsor. That king was George V. He was not the tallest, not the smartest, not the most charming king Britain ever had, but for 26 difficult years, he kept the country together when everything was falling apart. Today, you're going to hear the full untold story of the king who saved the monarchy without most people even noticing. Let's begin from the very beginning. On the 3rd of June 1865, a baby boy cried for the first time in Marlborough House, London. His name was George Frederick Ernest Albert. His father was the Prince of Wales, the future Edward VII. His mother was Princess Alexandra of Denmark. Little George was the second son. That meant one thing: nobody expected him to become king. His elder brother, Prince Albert Victor, everyone called him Eddie, was the one who would wear the crown one day. So what do you do with the second son? You send him to the Navy. At just 12 years old, George and his brother Eddie joined the Royal Navy together. They sailed around the world: Gibraltar, West Indies, Australia, Japan. In Japan, young George did something crazy for a prince. He got a big blue and red dragon tattoo on his arm. Even today, if you look at very old photos, you can sometimes spot it. George loved the Navy life. Simple uniforms, clear rules, good friends. He once said, "I am a sailor, not a prince." He rose to become a commander and thought his whole life would be on ships. But destiny had other plans. In January 1892, tragedy struck. Prince Eddie caught pneumonia and died suddenly at only 28 years old. Overnight, George became the direct heir to the British throne. From sailor to future king, just like that. Now he needed a wife. Guess who was already engaged to his dead brother? A German princess called Mary of Teck. Everyone called her May. She was smart, calm, and beautiful. George and May got engaged in 1893 and married on the 6th of July the same year. They fell deeply in love, real love, not just royal duty. People who knew them said George's eyes lit up every time May walked into the room. They had 6 children, 5 boys and 1 girl. The 2 eldest would later become kings themselves: Edward VIII, who gave up the throne for love, and George VI, the father of Queen Elizabeth II. Life seemed perfect. But then, on the 6th of May 1910, George's father Edward VII died. At the age of 44, George became King George V, and Emperor of India. His coronation was huge. On the 22nd of June 1911, thousands watched him crowned in Westminster Abbey. But George wanted something even bigger. He decided to travel to India, the jewel in Britain's crown. In December 1911, George and Queen Mary arrived in Delhi. Over 100,000 people came to watch. George became the first and only British king to be crowned Emperor of India on Indian soil. He wore the famous imperial crown of India that had a 34-carat diamond in it. He looked at the crowd and said quietly to his wife, "I have never felt so small and yet so proud in my life." But the good times didn't last long. Just 3 years later, in the summer of 1914, the world fell into madness. World War I began. George V's cousin was Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Yes, the German emperor who started the war was family. Queen Victoria was grandmother to both of them. George and Wilhelm had played together as kids. Now they were enemies. Britain joined the war to help France and Belgium. Millions of British men went to fight. Food became short. German airships bombed London. People started hating anything German. The royal family name was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, a very German name. Newspapers started calling the king horrible names. Someone even threw a brick at his car. George knew he had to do something big. In 1917, he made a brave decision. He dropped all German titles. He changed the family name to something short, strong, and totally English: Windsor. Why Windsor? Because Windsor Castle was the most English place he could think of. He told his cousin's relatives in Britain, "You have to change your name too." One cousin became the Marquis of Milford Haven. Another family, the Battenbergs, became the Mountbattens. Even today, Prince Philip and King Charles carry that name because of George V's decision. The war went on for 4 painful years. George visited the front lines many times. He talked to soldiers, shook muddy hands, gave out cigarettes. One day in 1915, his horse slipped in the mud, fell on him, and broke his pelvis very badly. He was in pain for the rest of his life, but he never complained. In November 1918, the war finally ended. Britain won, but at a terrible cost. Almost 900,000 British men never came home. George cried when he heard the numbers. He spent the next years opening war memorials and writing personal letters to mothers who lost sons. But new problems were coming. In 1922, Ireland exploded in violence. After years of fighting, George signed the treaty that gave Southern Ireland independence. Northern Ireland stayed British. It was a sad moment. The empire was starting to break. Then came something completely new, the Labour Party. In 1924, for the first time ever, a socialist became Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald. Many rich people were terrified. They thought the king would refuse. But George invited MacDonald to the palace, offered him tea, and said, "I am king of all the people, not just the rich ones." Britain became a proper democracy that day. 2 years later, in 1926, came the general strike. For 9 days, almost all workers stopped work, miners, train drivers, printers. The country almost stopped. George stayed calm. He told his government, "Treat the workers fairly. They are not enemies." His words helped end the strike peacefully. Slowly, the empire changed into something new, the British Commonwealth. In 1931, George signed the Statute of Westminster. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, they were now free to make their own laws. The empire was becoming a family of free nations. 1935 was a happy year, George's silver jubilee, 25 years as king. On the 6th of May, huge crowds filled London. Old ladies cried. Children waved flags. George and Mary came out on the balcony again and again. That night George wrote in his diary, "I am very touched. I never thought people loved me this much." But the king was not well. He smoked 20 to 25 cigarettes a day plus big cigars. His lungs were damaged. In 1928 he became so ill that doctors thought he would die. His son Edward acted as Prince Regent for months. George pulled through, but he was never the same. By late 1935, he was very weak. He spent Christmas at Sandringham House in Norfolk with his family. On the 15th of January 1936, he said his last words to his secretary, "How is the empire?" Then he fell into a coma. On the night of the 20th of January 1936, the king's doctor, Lord Dawson, made a secret decision. He wanted the king's death announced in the morning newspapers, not the evening ones. So he gave George a deadly injection of morphine and cocaine to speed things up. The king died at 11:55 p.m. The next morning, the whole world heard the news. The doctor wrote in his private diary many years later, "I did it so the king would die with dignity and at the right time." George V was 70 years old. He had ruled for 25 years, 260 days. His funeral was huge. His coffin was carried on a gun carriage through London. Millions lined the streets in silence. His eldest son became Edward VIII, but only for 11 months. Then Edward gave up the throne to marry Wallis Simpson. So George's second son became King George VI, the shy king who led Britain through World War II, and whose daughter became Queen Elizabeth II. So what did George V really leave behind? He saved the monarchy. In many countries, Germany, Russia, Austria, kings were thrown out after World War I. In Britain, people still loved their king because George was simple, honest, and hard-working. He created the House of Windsor, the name the royal family still uses today. He turned the empire into the Commonwealth, 56 countries that still meet every 2 years because of what he started. He showed the world that a king can change with the times, accept democracy, accept ordinary people, accept new ideas. George V was not perfect. He was strict with his children, especially poor Prince John, who had epilepsy and was hidden away. He didn't like new fashion or loud music. He once said, "After I am dead, the boy, Edward, will ruin himself in 12 months. But he loved his duty more than anything. Every single night for 26 years, no matter how tired or ill, he wrote in his diary. His last entry, just days before he died, said, "I am ready to go if God wants me." Today, when you see Queen Elizabeth II's coffin or King Charles III on TV, remember, the modern royal family exists because one shy sailor became a king who refused to let the crown fall. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't a great speaker. He didn't conquer new lands. But in the darkest years of the 20th century, he kept the light burning. And that, my friends, is the true story of King George V, the king who held Britain together when the world was tearing itself apart. Thank you for listening to this whole story. If you liked it, please hit that like button and subscribe for more untold royal histories.